Dear Santa, please send me a dad. Her letter to Santa ended up on the desk of a lonely billionaire. Winter wrapped New York City in its sharpest cold. Wind sliced through narrow streets, sweeping fallen snow into corners like forgotten memories. It was the kind of cold that settled in the lungs and stayed there. 5-year-old Julia Carter pulled her scarf tighter, breath fogging the fabric as she coughed. A dry, persistent sound that never left her when the weather turned. Her small hand gripped her mother's tightly. Angela Carter walked briskly. 28, slim, pale blonde hair twisted in a bun. Her coat was too thin for the temperature, but she never complained. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and helping at a discount store on weekends. Whatever money she had went toward rent, groceries, and Julia's medication for her chronic respiratory issues. Their apartment sat on the 5th floor of a rundown building in Queens. 1 room, 1 bed, a flickering space heater that barely worked. Nights were cold and quiet, except for Julia's cough and the soft hum of the city below. Every Friday, before her shift, Angela stopped outside a fast food place and let Julia sit by the window. Inside, children laughed, ketchup on their fingers, while their fathers lifted them into high chairs or fed them pieces of fried chicken. Julia never asked to go in. She just watched, cheeks pressed to the foggy glass, eyes wide, chest rising with soft wheezes. She never said a word, but Angela saw her reflection in the window, in the golden light, and it made her ache. That night, back home, Julia couldn't stop thinking about how her mother's smiles always faded too quickly, how her laughter never sounded like the ones in the restaurant. She wasn't old, but her eyes looked older than anyone Julia knew. While Angela boiled water for noodles, Julia curled under a blanket, coughing. When her mother wasn't looking, she reached for a piece of lined paper from her notebook, grabbed a dull pencil, and began to write. Dear Santa, please send me a dad. Not for me, but for Mommy too. I think she's lonely. Love, Julia Carter. Mommy, Angela. Beneath the words, she drew a picture. 3 people, tall man, smiling woman with a bun, and a curly-haired girl in the middle. They were all holding hands, all laughing. She folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her backpack, and waited for the right moment to send it. The next day, Angela took Julia grocery shopping. The sky was steel gray, the wind harsher. Julia coughed almost the whole way. Angela had no choice but to bring her. Childcare was too expensive, and the neighbor who sometimes helped was out of town. At the store, as Angela counted change at checkout, Julia spotted it outside, a bright red box beside the building, labeled in bold white letters, Customer Suggestions, Grayson Holdings. But to Julia, it looked exactly like a mailbox for Santa Claus. She tiptoed forward, pulled the letter from her backpack, and slipped it into the slot. Her lips moved silently. Please find him, Santa. Angela turned just as Julia came skipping back. What were you doing, honey? Nothing, Julia said, smiling small. Angela tousled her curls, unaware. She didn't see the letter disappear inside a box that wasn't magical, but would soon become part of something close. Monday morning, top floor of Grayson Holdings. CEO Kevin Grayson sifted through a pile of printed customer feedback left by his assistant. 34. Sharp-suited, brilliant, emotionally distant, he reviewed the notes with mechanical focus. Most were the same. Complaints, requests, complaints again. Then, between 2 forms, a piece of notebook paper fluttered down. Unofficial, childlike. He frowned, opened it. Dear Santa, please send me a dad. He froze. Love, Julia Carter. Mommy, Angela. Angela Carter. The name hit him like a sudden jolt. Months earlier, during a small electrical fire in the storage level, a janitorial staff member had saved an elderly man, pulling him out, staying calm, administering first aid. She refused any reward. He remembered going down himself, saw her, ash on her cheek, hand burned, blonde hair pulled back, eyes steady. Angela Carter. Now, her child had written to Santa, Not for toys, but for a father, for her mother. Kevin stared at the drawing. 3 stick figures, smiling. Something caught in his chest. Outside his window, snow had begun to fall. Soft, slow. He held the letter. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but he didn't put it down either. And for the first time in years, something inside him whispered, "Don't ignore this." The office was quiet, the early winter sun barely piercing through the tall glass windows of the Grayson Holdings headquarters. Kevin Grayson sat at his desk, sifting through the weekly collection of suggestion box submissions. Most were typed, stapled, and organized into neat stacks by his assistant. He read them with the same detached focus he applied to every task. Efficient, emotionless. Better lighting in the employee break room. Security needs to double-check ID badges at the west entrance. Please fix the vending machine on floor 7. It ate my dollar again. Kevin barely blinked. It was routine, predictable, forgettable, until his fingers brushed something different. A small piece of paper, hand-folded and tucked messily between 2 formal complaints. No header, no office stationery, just faint pencil markings on the outside, and a crease down the middle as if a child had pressed it shut with careful, clumsy hands. He unfolded it slowly. The first line stopped him cold. "Dear Santa, please send me a dad." Kevin stared at the words for a long moment. Not a joke. Not spam. He read on. A simple drawing. 3 stick figures. A tall man, a woman with a bun, and a small girl between them holding their hands. All 3 were smiling. Below, in uneven print, "Love, Julia Carter." "Mommy, Angela Carter." Kevin froze. He did not recognize the drawing, but the name, Angela Carter. The name that had stayed in his memory since that day in the warehouse 3 months ago. There had been a minor electrical fire, smoke, confusion. One of the senior maintenance workers collapsed from light smoke inhalation. And while the emergency team hadn't yet arrived, someone had already acted. Not a manager, not a safety officer, a janitor. He had arrived at the scene moments later, per protocol, and saw her kneeling beside the man, blonde hair loose from her clip, sleeves rolled up, voice calm as she supported his breathing and wrapped his shoulders in her own coat. Her hand was slightly burned. He remembered offering to call medical assistance. She declined. "I'm fine," she'd said. "It's just something anyone would do." But it wasn't something just anyone would do. She had gone back to cleaning, ignoring the soot on her hands. Quiet, unassuming. That was the moment he'd remembered her name. Not because she needed recognition, but because he couldn't shake the way she reminded him of someone else. His mother, a woman who had scrubbed floors, worked night shifts, raised him alone, and who had collapsed one day without anyone there to help. Now, her daughter, Julia, was writing letters to Santa, not asking for toys, not for games, but for a father, for her mother. Kevin read the line again. "Not for me, but for Mommy too. I think she's lonely." His chest tightened. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, blinking hard. A memory surfaced, him at 6 years old, curled under a blanket, writing in a journal because they couldn't afford postage. He had scrawled the same thing. "I wish someone would help my mom." He hadn't believed in Santa, but he had believed in hope. And now, 30 years later, another little girl had placed that same hope in a red box outside his building. A coincidence? Maybe. But it didn't feel that way. Kevin looked again at the letter. The lower corner had a slight water stain. Maybe from the snow. Or tears. The handwriting was shaky. This was truly a young child. She had written carefully, deliberately, and every word had landed like a quiet plea. Something stirred in him. Not obligation, not guilt, something else. He found himself wondering, why is Angela still struggling like this? Why does her daughter feel the need to wish for something so fundamental? Why now, right before Christmas, is this letter on my desk? Kevin didn't believe in fate. He believed in systems, control, outcomes. But this letter, This was not part of a system. It was personal. He placed the drawing back down on his desk. Next to it, the letter. There was no corporate protocol for this, no line in the employee handbook telling him how to respond. But he knew one thing. He could not ignore it. Kevin stared out at the snowy skyline for a long time. Then he said, under his breath, as if the words surprised even him, "Julia Carter, Angela Carter, I need to know more." Not out of pity, not because he felt responsible, but because, after all these years, his heart, long frozen, had just moved. Angela Carter's days blurred together like the gray winter sky above New York, monotonous, heavy, and unyielding. Her shift at Grayson Holdings started in the late afternoon and ended well past midnight. After clocking out, she moved to the warehouse where she handled inventory until 2 in the morning. She barely spoke. She barely slept. But she always smiled when she came home. Her daughter, Julia, was waiting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her small body curled tight against the cold. As Angela removed her shoes, she coughed, softly at first, then in short bursts that made her lean against the wall to steady her breath. Julia walked over, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, I'm already big. You don't have to work so much." Angela knelt down, brushing a curl from Julia's cheek. "I'm okay, baby. We're okay." But the warmth in her voice couldn't hide the fatigue in her eyes. At work, Angela moved like a shadow, efficient, invisible, forgettable. She greeted people politely, but never lingered. She volunteered for extra shifts, stayed silent when others complained. "She's kind," someone once said, "but it's like she's carrying a whole world we can't see." Angela didn't mind being invisible, until one small moment made her seen. That day, the cafeteria was quiet when Angela picked up her dinner, a tray of soup and bread. As she turned toward a table, another coughing fit hit. Her hands trembled, and the tray slipped, crashing loudly to the floor. The room went still. A few interns nearby exchanged looks, some laughing softly. Angela said nothing. She dropped to her knees, picking up the mess with shaking hands. Kevin Grayson walked by. He paused. He didn't speak, didn't help, but his eyes lingered for a beat longer than usual. Later that week, their worlds quietly touched again. Julia had coughed through the night. She had a mild fever, and daycare wasn't an option. With no one to help, Angela brought her to work, asking permission for Julia to stay in the break lounge near the warehouse. She wrapped her in a scarf, handed her crayons and paper. Julia promised to be quiet. Kevin was walking through the basement on his end-of-week inspection when he noticed a small figure sitting alone. A little girl with brown curls, drawing on her knees, a thick scarf wrapped around her neck. She coughed into her sleeve, eyes focused. He slowed his steps. The girl looked up and offered a polite, raspy, "Hi, mister." He blinked, surprised. He sat on the bench across from her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Julia Carter." The world tilted just slightly. His gaze dropped to her drawing. 3 figures. A small one in the middle, smiling. "What are you drawing?" "Me, and Mommy, and someone else. I don't know him yet, but Mommy needs him too." Kevin couldn't answer, could barely breathe. Angela appeared, breathless. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Grayson. I'll take her out." Kevin stood, calm. "It's all right. Let her rest. Kids get cold easier than we do." Angela hesitated, then nodded, guiding Julia's hand back to the crayons. Kevin walked away, but something in him stayed behind. Back in his office, he opened Julia's letter again. Before, it had been sweet. Now, it was real. He unfolded the drawing inside. It matched the one she'd been sketching. Same 3 stick figures, same warmth, same longing. No more guessing. He knew who she was, and who her mother was, and he knew, quietly, that he couldn't walk away. He was no longer observing from a distance. He had stepped, gently, unexpectedly, into their story, not out of pity, but because something inside him had finally responded to a call he'd buried for years. Kevin Grayson was no longer the same after meeting Julia Carter. He told no one. He changed no routines. But something in him had shifted. Quietly, insistently. He could still hear her voice in his head. "My mom needs him too." Since that day, he had started noticing things he never had before. The staff lounge for evening janitors, too cold, too dim. He had facilities check the heating units and quietly approved a small budget increase for better blankets and basic supplies. No one knew that the post-it note on the back of the thermostat, "There's a child here sometimes. Please don't let it drop below 75 degrees Fahrenheit," had been written by the CEO himself. The next step came more deliberately. That Saturday, the company hosted their Weekend for Warmth initiative, volunteers distributing meals to the homeless downtown. Usually, middle managers and marketing interns signed up, hoping to score points with HR. But this year, Kevin made a personal request to one employee, Angela Carter. "You have medical training," he said simply, "and you stay calm in emergencies. I want people like you out there, not just photo ops." Angela blinked, surprised, but nodded. That morning, she arrived with Julia bundled beside her. The little girl held tightly to her mother's hand, a slight cough still lingering. Kevin met them outside the van. His voice was low, his gaze kind. "Good morning, Julia." Julia gave a shy wave. "Hi." Again, Angela smiled politely, unsure what to make of it all. As the volunteers passed out meals and blankets, Kevin watched the mother and daughter. Angela moved with quiet confidence. Julia helped too, handing out water bottles with quiet focus. Midway through the morning, Julia began coughing again, wrapping her arms around herself. Kevin wordlessly slipped off his dark wool scarf and wrapped it gently around her neck. "This one's better than cotton. Keeps the back of your neck warm." Angela moved to object. "She's okay, Kevin gave a small shake of his head. "I had the same cough my whole childhood. Trust me." Angela's eyes met his. Something uncertain flickered in her face. Then she simply said, "Thank you." After the event, Kevin suggested they stop for dinner. Not a formal restaurant, just a small diner nearby. Julia's eyes lit up. "Can we get fried chicken?" Angela hesitated. Kevin nodded. "Sounds perfect." The three of them sat in a booth under soft lights. Julia chattered more than usual, telling Kevin about her drawings and how she once thought Santa was the pizza guy. Kevin laughed, genuinely. A sound even he hadn't heard in a long time. Angela watched. Something about the way he listened to Julia, how he answered each question with patience. It unsettled her, in the best way. When the food came, Julia clapped her hands. "Mommy, it's like we're in a Christmas movie." Angela smiled, still adjusting to the strange warmth of it all. Kevin, sensing her hesitation, shared a story. A Christmas when he was 10. No tree, no heat, but his mother had wrapped an old pair of gloves in newspaper and left them under his pillow. "I thought it was the best gift ever," he said, "because she gave it with everything she had." Angela looked down, then slowly back up, her expression shifting. On the ride home, Kevin offered a company car. This time, Angela said yes. As they reached her building, Kevin stepped out and crouched to Julia's level. "If Santa really exists," he asked softly, "and he sent your wish to someone, do you think he chose the right person?" Julia studied him, then smiled, wide, pure. "I think, maybe he did." She reached out and hugged him without hesitation. Angela stood still, heart caught in her throat. She didn't speak. But something in her eyes answered the question he hadn't dared to ask. Julia had begun to see Kevin as something safe, something steady, and in doing so, she quietly opened the door to both her mother's heart and his own. Angela had always drawn careful lines between herself and the world around her. She had to. Distance was safer. But lately, something had begun to shift, something small but impossible to ignore. Julia spoke of Mr. Kevin the way children spoke of fairy tale characters, like he belonged in their world somehow. She brought him up with an innocence that made Angela wary. "Sweetheart, he's a very busy man," Angela said one morning, helping Julia into her coat. "He's the head of the whole company. We shouldn't bother him." Julia paused, looking up with serious brown eyes. "But he looks at you like you're someone really important." Angela blinked, caught off guard. She had no answer. No one had looked at her that way in years. Kevin, on the other hand, had already crossed the line she didn't know she had drawn. Quietly, methodically, without announcement, he had begun to care. When he reviewed employee health screenings and saw Angela flagged for low blood pressure and early-stage kidney strain, something inside him pulled taut. He called an old friend from med school, a trusted internist, and arranged a discreet medical checkup. Angela came in for what she thought was a required wellness screening for night staff. The doctor simply said, "There's someone looking out for you. They just didn't want to make you uncomfortable." Angela walked home afterward, prescription in one hand and something unspoken in the other. But it was the phone call, late one Friday night, that made everything real. Julia had been coughing more that day, but by nightfall, her cheeks were burning and her breathing had grown shallow. Angela took her temperature 3 times, praying it would drop. It didn't. Panic rose in her chest. She considered calling an ambulance, but the looming cost froze her. She scrolled through her contacts and paused on one name, Kevin Grayson. Her thumb hovered, then moved, then pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way. No questions, no hesitation." 20 minutes later, his car pulled up. Angela stood on the curb, Julia in her arms, wrapped in a blanket. Kevin took one look at the child and gently lifted her into his own arms. On the drive to the hospital, they sat in silence. Snow fell in soft waves outside the window, muffling the city into stillness. Kevin finally spoke, voice low. "When I was 7, my mom collapsed during her night shift. I was home alone. I didn't know what to do. I just wished someone would carry her to safety." Angela looked at him. His hands were steady, but his voice held something fragile. At the hospital, Julia was stabilized quickly. The fever was high, but manageable. After the IV drip, her breathing eased. She fell asleep, fingers curled around the blanket. Angela sat beside her, drained. Kevin pulled up a chair on the other side. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Somewhere after midnight, Angela drifted off, and so did he. When Julia opened her eyes hours later, she saw them, her mother, and the man with kind eyes, both asleep, leaning in. She blinked, then reached out and took their hands, pulling them closer. "Mommy," she whispered. "I told Santa I didn't want toys anymore." Kevin stirred. He opened his eyes and looked at Angela. She was already awake, watching Julia with tears quietly welling. Neither spoke. But as their hands rested near Julia's, Kevin reached out, slowly, gently, and took Angela's hand in his. She didn't pull away. And in that quiet hospital room, with snow still falling outside and Julia breathing steady between them, something wordless passed between the two adults. Not a promise, but a beginning. Angela had always believed that resilience meant surviving quietly. But ever since that winter night in the hospital, she had begun to realize that sometimes strength looked a lot like letting someone stay. As her health slowly stabilized, thanks to consistent checkups and better care, Kevin approached her with a proposition. It was not a promotion, not exactly, but something entirely different. He invited her to join a newly formed division, Employee Care and Support, designed to create better policies for workers in vulnerable positions. "I need someone who understands what it means to work 2 jobs and still fall short," Kevin said, his voice calm but sincere. "Not someone with the perfect resume. I need someone real." Angela hesitated. She looked down at her hands, still rough from years of cleaning, and admitted softly, "I was in my final year studying biotechnology. I dropped out when I got pregnant. I never looked back." Kevin didn't flinch. He simply smiled. "Then maybe it's time to look forward." The change was quiet but meaningful. Angela began working days in the new department, learning policy writing, while still picking up extra shifts where needed. Julia, healthier now, started drawing fewer sad houses and more suns with smiling stick figures. One weekend, the company organized a team-building retreat in a lakeside park outside the city. Kevin insisted Angela come. Whether by coincidence or gentle orchestration, she and Julia ended up on Kevin's team for the main event, a silly, spirited game called Triangle Family Challenge. Each team of 3 had to complete obstacles while staying connected, by rope, or holding hands, or answering questions in perfect sync. At first, Angela felt awkward, but Julia's laughter made her loosen. Kevin's quiet steadiness kept her grounded. When Julia slipped on a patch of damp grass, it was Kevin who rushed forward to lift her up, brushing dirt from her knees with surprising tenderness. That evening, as they sat under string lights and drank cocoa by the fire pit, Julia leaned into her mother's side and asked, "Mommy, if someone has 2 people who love them very much, can that be called a family?" Angela blinked, her heart caught in her chest. She ran her fingers gently through Julia's hair and whispered, "Yes, baby, that's exactly what it means." Julia smiled, curling deeper into her coat. "Then I think I have a family now," she said softly. Angela didn't speak. She only looked across the fire, where Kevin sat watching them, not smiling broadly, not trying too hard, just being there. A few days later, Kevin sent Angela a handwritten invitation, not through official channels, not by email. It was tucked into Julia's backpack with a post-it that read, "Your mom's invited too." Angela unfolded the card. It was an invitation to the company's year-end executive dinner. The line at the bottom made her pause. No dress code, just bring the person you love most. For a long time, she considered not going. Those events were never for someone like her. The gowns, the laughter, the glasses of wine held just so. But Julia had found the card and begged, "Please, Mommy, let's go. We'll be together." Angela walked into the hall that evening in a navy blue blouse and black slacks. No jewelry, her hair pinned back simply. She expected glances, maybe whispers. But when Kevin turned and saw her, his eyes didn't flinch. He walked over, not with fanfare, but with quiet purpose. "Julia made her Christmas wish," he said. "She chose you. I'm just hoping I get to stand near that wish for a while longer." Angela didn't answer immediately. She looked around the room. For once, it didn't feel too grand or too far out of reach. Maybe because she wasn't alone in it. She smiled, a small, real smile. "Then I guess we'll see where wishes take us." They sat beside each other that night, not touching, not declaring, just 2 people, once strangers, now quietly circling the gravity of something neither had expected. And somewhere across the room, Julia watched them and beamed. Christmas Eve arrived under a dusting of fresh snow. Lights draped across balconies and storefronts, casting a soft glow over the city. Inside their modest apartment, Julia sat at the edge of the bed, a blanket around her shoulders and a faint flush on her cheeks. Angela touched her forehead. Still warm, but manageable. "You should rest, sweetheart," she said. Julia shook her head. "I have to go. I have to thank Santa." Angela smiled knowingly. "Because he sent Mr. Kevin," Julia added. "And that was the best present ever." Angela chuckled softly, wrapping a scarf around her daughter's neck. "Well then, we can't be late." That morning, as Angela sorted laundry, an envelope slipped under the door, cream-colored, handwritten. No logo, no formal tone, just one line. "Warm Christmas dinner. No dress code, just bring the one you love most." Inside was a card printed with a familiar drawing, Julia's sketch of 3 smiling figures under a crooked tree. Kevin had kept it, and now he'd turned it into an invitation. Angela stood still for a long time, holding the card. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, it was something deeper, an open seat, a quiet welcome. That evening, they arrived at Kevin's building. He was already waiting downstairs. Julia ran up first and hugged him tightly. "I brought Mommy's gift too," she said proudly. Kevin leaned down. "Then I guess I get 2 presents tonight." Angela laughed, a soft, genuine sound that felt unfamiliar on her lips. Upstairs, the apartment was simple but warm. A small Christmas tree blinked gently in the corner. Dinner was already set out: pasta, salad, and slightly burnt butter cookies Julia had helped bake. Kevin bit into one and smiled. "Tastes just like the ones my mom used to burn on purpose." Said it made the edges crispy. Angela raised an eyebrow. "Did it?" He grinned. "Not at all." She looked at him quietly for a moment. Then softly, "You don't talk about her much. Do you miss her?" He glanced down. Nodded once. "All the time, especially tonight." Angela didn't ask more. Her silence was enough. A kind of understanding passed between them. After dinner, Kevin walked with Julia to the tree. She sat cross-legged on the floor, rummaging through her pocket. "I have one more thing," she whispered. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. "Dear Santa, I think I already got my gift early. But if it's okay, can I keep it forever? Love, Julia." Kevin read it slowly, his throat tightening. He looked at Julia, then gently pulled her into a hug. Angela stood nearby, quiet, watching. No one said anything grand, no confessions, no speeches, just a shared moment beneath the soft glow of fairy lights. Julia didn't need to explain. Kevin didn't need to ask. Angela didn't need convincing. What they had wasn't loud. It was steady. And this time, Christmas didn't feel cold at all. 1 year later, the city looked the same on the outside. Gray sidewalks, blinking lights, the distant hum of holiday traffic, but everything had changed for Angela. She now spent her mornings in a small classroom downtown, studying nutrition and community care. It was a second chance at the degree she had once left behind. In the afternoons, she worked part-time at a local clinic, applying what she learned to help others who reminded her of herself not too long ago. Julia, now 6, had grown stronger. Her respiratory condition was still monitored closely, but with proper care and the gentle persistence of the pediatric specialist Kevin had quietly arranged, she hadn't had a serious episode in months. Life was still hard sometimes, but it wasn't lonely anymore. Kevin had stepped down as CEO of Grayson Holdings. The suits, the board meetings, the endless strategic memos, all of it had begun to feel distant, irrelevant. Instead, he had become the senior advisor of a foundation he helped start. Hands First, a nonprofit dedicated to helping single mothers return to school, rebuild careers, and restart dreams. Angela had been one of the first to write a full proposal for a new scholarship under the foundation's name. It was titled The Mother's Grant. She was no longer someone in need of help. She was part of the change. As the year drew to a close, Grayson Holdings hosted its annual recognition gala, an event once dominated by executives and shareholders, now transformed into a celebration of impact. Angela stood on the main stage, under soft lights, in front of hundreds. She wore a plain navy dress. No designer label, no jewelry, just a quiet confidence that hadn't been there a year ago. "When I was younger," she began, her voice steady, "I thought asking for help was weakness. I thought strength meant doing it all alone." She glanced toward the front row. Kevin sat beside Julia, who was swinging her feet beneath her chair. "But I learned," she continued, "that letting someone in, giving them space in your life, can make both of you stronger." The applause that followed filled the room. Kevin didn't clap right away. He just looked at her, as if he were memorizing the moment. Later that evening, the three of them walked beneath the lights strung over Fifth Avenue. Julia ran ahead, giggling, weaving between puddles of melted snow. Angela and Kevin walked quietly behind her, their steps in sync, their hands brushing occasionally but not quite meeting. Angela looked sideways at him. "If someday," she said slowly, "I don't need help anymore, would you still stay?" Kevin stopped, turning to face her. Without hesitation, he reached out and took her hand. "I'd stay," he said softly. "Not because you need me, but because I need you." their fingers intertwined, firm but gentle. Julia turned around just then and ran back to them. She threw her arms around both their legs, looking up with her gap-toothed grin. "Mom," she asked, "is Mr. Kevin your boyfriend now?" Angela opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Kevin chuckled. Angela looked at him. They both burst into laughter. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their hands remained clasped, warm against the chill of winter. And sometimes, that was all the answer the heart ever needed. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, don't forget to show your love. A single letter changed 3 lives forever, and sometimes all it takes is a little hope and a lot of heart. If you believe in the quiet magic of second chances, in love that grows from kindness, and in families built not just by blood but by choice, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and hit that hype button to support more beautiful tales like this one, because every story we tell begins with someone believing.